With Escape from New York, director John Carpenter essentially created a new genre by deftly lampooning the action film genre. Up through the 1970s, films about anti-heroes had been traditionally confined to contemporary settings. But in the early 1980s, audiences now started seeing a slew of anti-heroes cast against dark future backgrounds. While many of these films were serious in their tone, Escape from New York showed us an anti-hero in a near future that was a black comic jab about the notion of an imperial America, while at the same time paying homage to the man with no name of Sergio Leone. In using science fiction to reference cinema's past while subversively poking fun at the politics of the present, it is a film that thematically shares more with a classic film like Planet of the Apes than with the other lower-budget sci-fi of its era. After the runaway success of his indie slasher film Halloween and his second ghost story film, The Fog, Carpenter had become attached to write and direct the sci-fi time travel film The Philadelphia Experiment, based on the popular urban legend about the alleged vanishing of the USS Eldridge during a radar cloaking test. When the project stalled, Carpenter showed producers a script treatment he had written during the Watergate era about a lone man being sent into Manhattan, which had become a maximum security prison, to rescue the president. Avco Embassy studio heads loved the idea and gave the film the go-ahead. Carpenter had written the film as a straight action piece, but would enlist the aid of screenwriter and friend Nick Castle to help flesh out the story. And it's in this collaboration where the film gets its more memorable touches of ironic comedy, which Carpenter felt would fit the dry, deadpan humor of New York City. Carpenter had previously worked with Kurt Russell on his made-for-TV biopic of Elvis Presley in 1979, which earned Russell an Emmy nomination. Russell had been a teen matinee idol for Disney in the mid-60s and on into the early 70s, and had appeared in many television shows of the era, including Lost in Space and The Fugitive. In his 20s, though signed to a 10-year contract with Disney, Russell decided to pursue his dream of being a professional baseball player, playing in 3 Western minor league teams. While playing for the El Paso Sun Kings in 1973, he tore his rotator cuff after colliding with a player sliding into second base and was forced to retire from baseball. Before his injury, he had been leading the Texas League with a .563 batting average as switch hitter. The Elvis miniseries would mark his return to acting as an adult, but it would be the character of Snake Plissken in Escape from New York that Russell would remark was his favorite character he'd ever played.
There are those moments when you know a character's probably going to work. And one night I had to go down about 3 blocks, and we didn't have anybody to go down there with me, so I just went down. I geared up with all my guns and everything. It was one of the things for Snakes coming in to, do wreak some havoc. And I came around the corner, and there's these 4 guys there. And we're around the corner now, and none of my guys can see me. And I just looked at these guys, and they looked at me. And this is how different this was at that time. When you saw that guy with a serious machine gun and a knife and a bunch of stuff you didn't know what it was even, and that gun which had and I just flashed that light a little bit on the gun, and these guys looked at me. And they were pretty rough characters, and they went, "Hey man, easy, easy." And they just kind of turned and very kind of quietly walked away. And I couldn't wait to get down and tell John, I think this guy's going to work.
The genre-defining look and sound of the character would later inspire, among others, the character of Solid Snake in Hideo Kojima's popular Metal Gear video game franchise. Russell's then-wife Susan Hubley would also make an appearance in the film, as a gang girl in the chock-full of nuts scene. Veteran Western actor Lee Van Cleef was tapped for prison warden Bob Houck, and is a nod to Leone's films, as he had often appeared with Clint Eastwood, whose Man with No Name character was the inspiration for Snake. Late soul singer and activist Isaac Hayes would play the powerful gang leader, the Duke of New York, and brings a cool ferocity to the film's main antagonist.
What did I teach you?
You are the Duke of New York. You're a #1.
Veteran character actor Ernest Borgnine would play Cabby, the film's most light-hearted character, which was one of Nick Castle's key contributions to the script. Donald Pleasance, who had worked with Carpenter on Halloween, would return to play the role of the unnamed President of the United States, and reinforces the idea of the corrupt and questionable leadership of the post-Watergate era. Harry Dean Stanton plays Brain, a sharp and untrustworthy convict who figures things out for the Duke, yet is ready to double deal at a moment's notice, and has a sordid past relationship with Snake. Brain's girlfriend Maggie was written to be played by Carpenter's wife Adrienne Barbeau, who had previously played the heroine in Carpenter's The Fog. Frank Doubleday and John Strobel would play character parts named after director friends George Romero and David Cronenberg. Doubleday's Romero makes a memorable image with his filed teeth and striking poses in imitation of Elsa Lanchester as the Bride of Frankenstein. Ox Baker, a pro wrestler who plays the arena fighter Slag, apparently got a little carried away during his and Russell's fight scene, and Russell allegedly had to tap him in the groin to get him to calm down. Some interesting side notes. The agent trying to open the cockpit at the beginning of the film was played by Stephen Ford, son of former President Gerald Ford. Also, producer Deborah Hill gives the film's opening narration, not Jamie Lee Curtis, as has often been rumored. Escape from New York was budgeted at around $7 million, Carpenter's largest budget to date, and features a great deal of really clever miniature and optical effects, many of which were designed by Roger Corman Studios' young effects wizard, James Cameron, who would later become king of the world. This cockpit heads-up display on Snake's glider, for example, without access to vector graphics displays, which were very new at the time, was done by covering a scale model of the city in reflective tape outlines and photographing it with blacklight. Cameron also created some really excellent glass paintings of the cityscape that rival the work of veteran painter Albert Whitlock, who would later work with Carpenter on The Thing. Production designer Joe Alves rejected shooting in New York City, as it would have been too costly to give the city streets the destroyed look necessary for the story, so locations that could pass for Manhattan were sought in other places. As it turned out, a fire had decimated several city blocks along Locust Street in East St. Louis several years earlier, and the film crew would be able to shoot there at a premium, as well as getting permission from the city to cut electricity for nighttime shooting. Director of photography Dean Cundy, longtime collaborator with Carpenter, would here use special lenses designed to draw as much light as possible from the darkened street scenes. This is one area where the high-definition remaster of the film really shines, as earlier standard-definition copies of the film did not highlight the subtle lighting effects that were employed. The 69th Street Bridge scene would be filmed on the old Chain of Rocks Bridge in St. Louis, which had been unused and scheduled for demolition for nearly a decade before the filming. And Carpenter would purchase the bridge for $1 and later resell it back to the city for liability reasons. A scene where the president is held aboard an abandoned train was shot in a train yard in Europe on the actual Orient Express, which had been retired in 1977. The only scene that was filmed in New York itself is at Liberty Island, and Escape from New York would be the first film ever to shoot there at night. The rest of the USPF facility was built in the basin of the LA River. Avco Embassy had initially wanted some more backstory on the character of Snake, and Carpenter later came up with a sequence where Snake and a hacker named Taylor rob a Federal Reserve in Colorado and hijack an automated train to San Francisco, where Snake is caught and his partner killed by the United States Police Force. But test audiences felt that this slowed down the intro to the film too much and made Snake seem less tough, so it was dropped from the theatrical release, but it can be found in supplementary material from later home editions of Escape from New York. John Carpenter and Alan Howarth would create a minimalist synthesizer score that plays on the film's eccentric referencing of the past. The opening theme, for example, is, in its martial structure, effectively a piece of medieval court music. Other themes would have a funkier edge, like the theme for the Duke's Entourage. Or the 69th Street Bridge chase music, which is a personal favorite. Of note is a really nice electronic rendering of Debussy's The Engulfed Cathedral, used in the glider sequence, which gives a dreamy ambient feel to the film's most complicated effects set piece. Escape from New York garnered generally good reviews, though some reviewers didn't care for the film's eccentric, tongue-in-cheek quest construction and humor, expecting it to be more of a straight-ahead action film. It nevertheless went on to become a cult classic, and a role that became permanently associated with Kurt Russell, and lodged in pop culture and video games. TSR Games made an Escape from New York board game around the time of the film's release, and it was an enjoyable single-player game. I had a copy of it when it came out. It does, however, remain something of a mystery why a current-gen video game of Escape from New York has never been released. Its story and action would certainly be a no-brainer for the first- and third-person action game genre of today. Although there was a PS2 game that was all but set to release in 2005, the untimely death of producer Deborah Hill caused it, and an anime based on Snake's adventures by Studio IG with Kurt Russell providing voice talent, to be indefinitely shelved. Escape from New York is a permanent fixture in late 20th century American cult movies. It brought Kurt Russell back to the big screen as a genre-defining badass, cemented Carpenter's reputation as one of the best indie directors of his day, and made his remake of The Thing, one of the best sci-fi horror films ever made, possible. It's a shame the franchise never continued with the same spirit of the first film. The sequel, Escape from LA, made during Carpenter's low period in the mid-90s, didn't bring anything new to the screen, and I personally find it an embarrassing, thrown-together rehash of the original, though it does have some good moments. I hope one day Snake comes back to the big screen with the trademark humor that made the film a cult classic, in either live action or an animated series. In a time when reboots and sequels are a going concern, it seems flat-out bizarre to let this one go quietly. That's all for now.